And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I think we got here ideologically, because, and I will tell you about the history behind where we are right now. But I think it's important to recognize that there is an ideology behind this um, this bill and behind the MAGA Republicans that is part of America. It's one that has ruled us in the past. It is one that, until now at least, and the jury is still out, we have always overcome. So it's worth thinking, I think, a bit about the ideology behind this bill and behind MAGA Republicans. And that is, if you think about the world, there's two ways, at least in the United States, to think about the relationship of people to their government. One is simply to say, well, some people are better than others. They're smarter, they're richer, they're the right color, they're the right religion, they're the right gender. You could come up with any reason you would like. They're married to the right people, they're descended from the right people, to say that some people are better than others. And if you admit the principle that some people are better than others, well, by definition, they should be able to rule. And that's the idea behind kings. And that's the idea behind oligarchies, a group of people organizing a government to rule everybody. That's the idea behind dictators. And that's the idea behind autocrats.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. Well, I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you're watching me from. As you know, I'm your host and presenter, Agent Stories. Now, I think it's making sense right now that the place where the United States is today is as a result of those people who are indoctrinated to the Make America Great Again movement. Yes, I'll say it was an indoctrination. Because you know what an indoctrination does to you? You immerse yourself in something that you don't know it's going to be harming you. And you find it so difficult to get away from that because it's tied to your identity. Make America Great Again was something which was appealing to a lot of white folks. I'm not saying all, but a lot of white folks with some few black people. And this thing has brought devastating effects to the people of the United States. Majority of the problems that you're seeing today has been caused by this. Economic fall, the economic sanctions that you're seeing between Russia and China that are happening, all this has been caused by this great movement because people pushed this movement to the ballot box. And now when the reality hit it, things changed. And in today's video, I'm welcoming this beautiful woman who is gonna be explaining to us how the ideology of MAGA movement has made the United States what it is today. So I want you to buckle up for this video. It is really, really enlightening for us to have this great discussion because remember, the genesis of MAGA is a political nostalgia. This is something the United States really wished to be, or at least it was something that they perceived that it was great. And making it great again, was it possible? And wait, was America really great again? Great again for who? Black people or white people? Or Americans themselves? Let me know when America was great for you if you're watching this video. The slogan "Make America Great Again," popularized by Mr. Donald Trump in 2025, taps into a romanticized vision of an idealized past. Yet this past was marked by industrial prosperity, strong borders, white Christian cultural dominance, and never equally great for all Americans. For Black, indigenous, immigrants, and working-class people, that greatness often coincided with segregation, exclusion, and exploitation. And in that case, MAGA is therefore less about recovering a democratic ideal and about reinstating historical hierarchies. It weaponizes nostalgia as a form of cultural grievance, adding the return of a time when white, male, heterosexual dominance was unchallenged. Let's watch this video. I'll be back. Be blessed.
Authoritarians, that they're just better than the rest of people. And ultimately, if some people are better than others, it makes sense that one person is better than everybody else and has the right to rule. And that is, as I say, the ideology behind Hitler, the ideology behind somebody like Vladimir Putin, the ideology behind dictators, sometimes the ideology behind kings in the 19th century and before that. It is also the ideology behind human enslavement in the American South and in the parts of the United States where indigenous Americans were enslaved. In the American West, for example, the idea that, those people do not have the ability, the religion, the gender, the color, the whatever, to participate in their government, and they must be ruled. And that is, I think, what you're increasingly seeing. I mean, this has been the argument in the on the radical right now since at least the 1950s. But you're really seeing that play out here with this idea of imprisoning people right now, largely people of color, but it's going to expand. If history is any judge. But you're also seeing it with Trump saying things like he's going to let some farmers keep the migrants who have been working there undocumented for 20 years because those are the good ones. And that those, they'll look out for those people. And that is quite literally what enslavers and then unreconstructed Southerners said about Black Americans or brown Americans in the American South and in the American West in the late 19th century. I mean, it's literally the exact same language. But we're in a really different place in this moment, in that in those eras, because the people who had been enslaved, discriminated against, kept down because of their gender or whatever, had really never had opportunities. It was possible to construct a worldview in which you could say, well, those people can never learn because it had been illegal to give them education. But we in front of us in the United States today have literally, since the 1970s and after the programs of the Great Society go into place in the mid-1960s, seen a world in which racial, gender, religious, ability minorities have been able to demonstrate their equality, which I think is one of the things giving such fangs to MAGA is that I saw recently Charlie Kirk talking about how Ketanji Brown Jackson was a DEI or a civil rights hire. And if you've read anything by Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's brilliant. And, she's done all this amazing stuff. And Charlie Kirk dropped out of community college in his first, I think it was the first semester. And it's basically just a grifter, a shit poster. I'm sorry. Somebody who just says horrible stuff. And, faced with the reality that people who are not white men are in fact equal and sometimes, quite frankly, more than equal, what you are seeing in this moment is the attempt to erase our history, to erase Harvey Milk's name off a ship, Harriet Tubman's name off a ship, to erase the women who worked worked in intelligence, to get rid of the history of the Black and brown and gay and female and whatever people who built this country. And I think that recognition, you can look at the enslavers and the unreconstructed Southerners and recognize that they are worried that maybe they're not going to always stay on top of things. But I think you look at this moment where they're not simply preventing people from getting rights. They're trying to erase all that, says they recognize that they have to erase us all in order to regain control of the country. And I think that is what we are seeing now. That recognition that people really are equal, and they've got to erase those, throw us out of jobs, throw us out of the country, get rid of us all in order to, they can't do it without doing that. They can't regain control of the country unless they shut everybody else up, because we really can do it. The other ideology speaks to reality, to the reality I just described. It says that everybody is created equal and that the government has a responsibility to protect that equality, to make sure everybody is treated equally before the law, that they have equal access to resources, and they have a right to a say in their government. And that's what really reflects reality. The idea that, it doesn't necessarily, your contribution to society does not necessarily correlate to your paycheck. That, maybe you're the person who, checks on the little old ladies in your town, even though you're not, a wolf on Wall Street. And that recognition that that's the way the world really works is the ideology that stands against that idea that some people are better than others. And the reality is, the vast majority of people in the United States believe that. And what's more, we have proof that this country does best when the government acts on that. Quite literally, this is what the US government did after 1933 when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected and took office. And it's the world that we have lived in since the 1935 Social Security Act, which provided the basics of a social safety net for those people who were destroyed in our trade-based economy, if they were injured, or if they were widowed, or if they were children who didn't have parents, and so on. So if you look at how the United States functioned under that system from 1933 to 1981, it had a booming economy. It had the difference in poverty rates was declining. The opportunities were increasing. People were getting education, and so on and so forth. And that's what the Reagan Revolution stopped. And we are now seeing, with this measure, the ultimate attempt to destroy that government and take us back to a world where a very few people will rule. But we have added in this moment this extraordinary deficit spending, which, in the 1920s, they never would have done when they were living like this. The Republicans simply would have balanced the budget. I mean, the crazy thing here is what you're seeing is not a return to the 20s even. What you're seeing is essentially open looting. So you should be angry about this bill. You should be incredibly sad about this bill, as I am. But again, I'm going to emphasize that all is not over. And here's why I say that. I looked up the numbers because one of the things that really gives me hope in this country is that it's a really big country. There are 334 million of us in this country. Actually, I think it's a little low. I think there's more than that. So people make comparisons of where we are right now to Nazi Germany. And Nazi Germany, I looked up the numbers, had 67 million people in 1933. That's a much smaller country. And we're a much bigger physical country as well. And we have a federal system in which we have a number of democratic states led by democratic governors who are pushing back against the measures that this bill and that the Trump administration are trying to put in place. So one of the people I'm watching very closely is J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, who is, running a pretty tight ship up there in terms of taking care of the people in Illinois and protecting them from ICE and creating essentially an image of what the government can be. But he's not the only one. There are a number of Democratic-dominated states, and it's going to be more difficult to create a juggernaut of the United States as a fascist system than it is a smaller country. Other piece of this, of course, is that the Trump administration is just wrecking the economy. They are wrecking the economy. And a lot of people have said that this bill, with its unaddressed extraordinary deficits and then debt, is going to hurt that even more. And, people like me are very concerned at the degree to which Trump is invested in cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency really pays off if the dollar is devalued, which it seems he's working to do. So that's another piece that's out there. But there is hope within this. And that is that All of these measures are deeply unpopular, not only among poor people who are hurt by them, or people who care about social welfare and social justice who are hurt by them or hurt by the fact their neighbors are being hurt. But when you look at the destruction of the US economy, you're also hurting entrepreneurs, you're hurting capitalists, you're hurting people who really voted for Trump or supported Trump or didn't vote for the Democrats because they didn't like the idea of the higher taxes that first President Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris said that they would put in place. They wanted this tax cut. They wanted another tax cut. Well, that now is they've got, but they've also got along with it what certainly appears to be the real instability in the economy, the tariffs, hits to the dollar, Trump's attack on the Fed, and so on. So there is room here for the kind of coalition that threw out Herbert Hoover and replaced him with FDR. And I see the language of someone like FDR. I'm not making this explicit comparison. I'm looking at the language of through somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York, or Mamdani, the Democratic nominee for New York mayor. So that language is starting to be out there, and there is room to build that coalition. But as I say, we've got the issue of this new ICE police force, which is terrible. And we should be speaking out against it because this is quite literally one of the things that the colonists of the King George III spoke up about and created their own nation to get away from. And here we have it. There are people pushing back against that as well. The courts, most of all, of course, but people speaking up really matters.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. You've heard all the sentiments that this woman had to share. And I think it's important that she brings up this great event. And she's a good scholar because she points out the problem that MAGA came up with. And a couple of that I had a presentation also in regards to that. And I think all these complement each other. And let me know what you think about her opinions in regards to all this. Now, talking about the weaponization of white grievance and cultural fear, MAGA's is rooted in fear and demographic and cultural shift. As America becomes more diverse, MAGA has served as a political response to white anxiety over losing cultural and political dominance. Remember that this movement often conflates patriotism with ethno-nationalism, framing immigrants, Muslim, black activists, and liberals as existential threats. MAGA thrives on the narrative that the real America is under attack, not by global enemies, but by domestic others who do not conform to a narrow conservative definition of what it means to be American. Right? You know that this also comes from economic populism masking corporate interest. Yes, it has been happening. While MAGA represents itself as a populism revolt against the political elite, it is, its actual policies like tax cuts for the rich, deregulation, anti-labor legislation have overwhelmingly benefited corporations and the wealthy. The movement manipulated working class resentment by blaming immigrants, globalization, and liberal elites, rather than targeting the real culprits of job loss and wage stagnation, automation, corporate offshoring, and decades of neoliberal economic policies. MAGA gave working class people a target for their own anger, but not solution that materially improved their lives. Also, the erosion of democratic norms and institutions. One of the most dangerous effects of MAGA ideology has been its assault on democratic institutions. Trump's consistent attacks on the judiciary, the press, election integrity, and the legitimacy of political opponents have created a political culture where truth is malleable and loyalty to the leader outweighs constitutional fidelity. The 2020 elections, the now culminating in the January 6th insurrection, is a stark example of how MAGA undermines democracy itself. Rejecting any outcome not aligned with its interest. This authoritarian drift has reshaped the Republican Party and corroded public trust in governance. Also, talking about racial division as a political strategy, MAGA has used racial division not as a byproduct, but as a deliberate political tool. The movements of opposition to Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, and immigration reforms reveals a deep investment in preserving racial hierarchies, from calling Mexicans rapists to defending Confederate monuments and demonizing athletes for kneeling during the national anthem. MAGA politics have normalized racial antagonism as form of cultural defense. This has emboldened hate groups, increased racial violence, and rolled back decades of hard-fought civil rights progress. Right? Now, the moral and religious hypocrisy of this movement, this is what we're going to be talking about right now. Many of MAGA's most ardent supporters are white evangelical Christians. And despite Trump's personal life and policies contradicting Christian ethics, this reveals the movement true moral compass, not adherence to faith, but the pursuit of cultural and political power. Churches have been complicit in promoting nationalism over compassion, militarism over peace, and exclusion over inclusion. This spiritual compromise has weakened the moral voice of American Christianity and damaged interfaith solidarity. The result is a Christianity that is increasingly seen as a political identity rather than moral or spiritual force. Right. This has an impact on women and gender politics. That's the MAGA. The MAGA era has also reignited patriarchal attitudes towards gender roles. From Trump's own misogynistic rhetoric to attack on reproductive rights and gender affirming care, the movement has worked to reinforce traditional gender norms. It portrays feminism rights and gender equality as threat to societal order. Policies like overturning of Roe v. Wade and anti-trans legislation are not just political acts. They are cultural signals that the all-gender order must be restored. And this backlash has had real consequences on the autonomy, safety, and dignity of women and gender minorities. And so it's important to recognize that while we're talking about this. Also talking about the mental and social toll on every American. And this is true. MAGA has created a toxic political climate marked by suspicion, hostility, and division. Families have been split, communities fractured, and civic dialogue destroyed. Social media, talk radio, and far-right news channels have turned politics into a spectacle of rage and misinformation. For many Americans, especially marginalized communities, the MAGA movement has brought increased anxiety, harassment, and fear. For others, it has created a bubble of false empowerment where conspiracy theories substitute for facts and belligerence is mistake for bravery, right? Also, I'm going to be talking about international reputation for foreign policy damage. Under the MAGA banner, American foreign policy shifted towards isolation, unilateralism, and unpredictability. Long-standing alliances were strained, climate agreements abandoned, and diplomatic norms disregarded. Trump's causing up to autocrats while alienating democratic allies diminishes America's global credibility. Now, internationally, MAGA projected a vision of America as a belligerent, self-serving empire rather than cooperative global leader. The consequences include weakened diplomacy, emboldened adversaries, and retreat from international responsibility, especially in humanitarian crises and global climate efforts. And that's how all these has been affecting each other. I would like also to talk about the exploitation of rural and poor white communities, because they're affected, but they're not saying this. MAGA's core base, rural working class white Americans, has been little tangible benefit from its policies. Instead of addressing the real needs of these communities like healthcare, job creation, education, and infrastructure, MAGA has fed them a steady diet of cultural resentment and fear-mongering. Poor white people are used as political tools while still suffering from poverty, addiction, and economic despair. Remember that the movement has offered identity politics of whiteness and nationalism as a substitute for real structural change. Now, as a result, these communities remain economically stagnant but ideologically inflamed. The death of shared reality and rise of conspiracism. MAGA as mainstream conspiracy theory, from QAnon to election fraud lies, undermining the very concept of objective truth. This epistemological crisis is perhaps the most insidious legacy. In a society where facts are optional and lies are defended as free speech, it becomes nearly impossible to build consensus or solve problems. This has devastated public health, seen as during the COVID-19 pandemic, which disrupted education and emboldened anti-science and anti-intellectual movements. A population that cannot agree on basic reality is a population that cannot govern itself democratically. Now, I would like to end by saying that the MAGA era has inflicted deep wounds on the American psyche, economy, and democracy. It exposed fault lines that were always present: racial division, class inequality, cultural fear, but also deepened them through manipulation and misinformation. Healing from this ideology will take more than defeating it electorally. It will require a cultural and a moral transformation, a recommitment of truth, equity, and collective well-being. Americans must reimagine patriotism not as exclusion or domination, but as shared responsibility. Only then can a country begin to reclaim the promise of its own experiment. I'm your host and presenter, Eugene Stories. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.